Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is calling for the deportation of all unauthorized immigrants from Israel. This just days after a riot in Tel Aviv between rival groups of Eritreans left more than 100 people injured. His remarks are reviving a long-running debate about the fate of thousands of mainly Eritrean and Sudanese asylum seekers who entered Israel illegally over the past 2 decades and now live in legal limbo as they await the processing of their asylum-seeking request. Netanyahu and other political leaders have often called for their expulsion, spurred by fears that their presence might encourage further waves of immigration that would dilute Israel's Jewish majority. Rights activists say the refugees should be given formal residency and argue it's Israel's duty as a country founded by refugees to provide shelter to other people fleeing hardship. For more on this story, I'm joined by I-24 News anchor and economy expert Ariel Margalith. Ariel, tell us, how many asylum seekers from Eritrea are there in Israel and at the moment, and why are there supporters of the regime among them?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that we're all asking that after the riots that we saw in Tel Aviv on Saturday that injured more than 135 people, including 40-something police officers. Huge violence in the south of Tel Aviv that was responded by the police with live fire. Big questions around that as well. Why were there bullets fired against those demonstrators and protesters that were clashing with each other? To answer your question, around 18,000 asylum seekers from Eritrea altogether. Most of them came into Israel in the last few years before there was a wall of barrier separating between Israel and Egypt and the Sinai Peninsula. They came in illegally, most of them. Again, was the government's responsibility to control the border, which they didn't. We ended up with 18,000. Now it's a big question, as you say. Why are there supporters of the government? Because most of those asylum seekers are fleeing what is considered to be a harsh dictatorship in Africa. Eritrea separated from Ethiopia. Those were the events, by the way, that it was celebrating on Saturday, and is considered to be one of the most hardship dictatorships in the world, the North Korea of Africa, if you will, and most of them fled torture, arrest, compulsory drafting into an army that is considered to be basically modern slavery. And the question is, why are there government supporters? So according to the data, out of these 18,000 or so asylum seekers from Eritrea, there are around 2,000 or so that are supporters of the regime in Eritrea, who are not in danger in returning to there. And it's a major question, why are they here? And this is, of course, the reason for the clash between the two parts of that community.
Right. And so, as we mentioned, there are refugees from both Eritrea and as well as Sudan who have now lived here for 2 decades and who have formed some sort of life while waiting for this legal limbo, and they've gotten jobs and they have become a part of the Israeli economy. Tell me a little bit about that role that they play.
Yeah, so we're talking about, it's not a big population, but they were mostly taken in buses and dropped in the south of Tel Aviv when they arrived in Israel. But since the beginning of 2023, a new legislation was passed and made it compulsory for them to work only in certain areas of work, for example, hotels, restaurants, only those who had permits for working in restaurants before, assisting elderly, etc. And also to certain geographies. So they're also limited to where they can work. But these are the facts. In praxis, what we're seeing is they're taking part in the economy and many jobs and filling many jobs that other Israelis do not want to fulfill. For example, washing dishes at restaurants, a lot of cleaning jobs, etc. A lot of hotel work in the back, of the back corridors where you don't see the staff so much. All of these jobs are taken by that population, and it's very easy for these business owners to have them. It's also easy for some of the politicians to keep them here.
Absolutely. And Netanyahu and his government blame the Supreme Court in the riots, but does the Supreme Court have a say in this case?
Look, the Supreme Court is defending human rights, but it has nothing to do, of course, with the case of the Eritrean asylum seekers here in Israel. Israel is signed on an international petition, an international agreement that basically just does not return refugees or asylum seekers to countries in which they would be in danger. So So Israel cannot just return them to Eritrea. It has nothing to do with the Supreme Court. It has to do with international agreements that Israel is signed on. This is a populistic move by Netanyahu and Smotrich and Levin and other ministers in this government to blame, in fashion, everything on the Supreme Court. Let's make that clear. However, there have been attempts by the Israeli government to send these asylum seekers abroad. There was an agreement back in 2018 that was signed by Netanyahu to send most of these refugees, asylum seekers, to European countries, and he took it back. He never fulfilled that agreement.
And Ariel, briefly, how are these Eritreans responding to Netanyahu's call for them to be deported?
Yeah, so there is a plan in place. We've actually seen around 1,600 Eritrean asylum seekers leaving Israel in the last few months in 2023 so far. There's an incentive. They receive a stipend of $3,500 for each person that leaves. And now there are discussions about increasing that incentive, that monetary incentive, in order to allure to more people, to more asylum seekers, in hope that they would leave the country. A lot of politics involved. We'll see how this unfolds.
Ariel Margalith, thank you very much for that breakdown.